then the and then the rest.
Don't be using that.
See where it is now. I can't put it on.
My glasses probably like shades right now.
Yeah.
So they
That's, yeah.
Pastor
Walker, mic check, please.
Pastor Kevin L. Walker, mic check, Psalms 123, Psalms 122, and all the rest of them songs. Some people call them poems.
Okay, now go again.
All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, mic check. Pastor Kevin L. Walker, Nashville, Tennessee. Last time I checked, that's where I was. Am I sounding all right? Can I be quiet now? Lord is my shepherd. That's Dr. Haney there. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures and some other stuff he makes me do too. We're not going to talk about it. Are we good? Are we good? Are we good? Are we good? Is everything working out all right? Are we good? Are we good? I was glad. All right, I'm going to go with some scripture.
Sergeant Benita Blue, mic check 1, 2, 3. I'm getting tips from the doctor of mic check over here. Thank you for having us. Greatly appreciate it. Former student of Dr. Haney, had to write many of papers. Get up early. Was it on Saturday or Sunday morning at 6 or 7 o'clock to make sure I had to get all my notes in order to do my paper and have it on time.
All right, that's good.
Okay, very good.
Officer James Duke, 1, 2, mic check. 1, 2, 3.
Somebody you don't.
All right.
Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department and Community Relations. And we're fortunate to have with us to talk about the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department and Community Relations, Pastor KWalker. And of course with Pastor KWalker is Miss Benita, Officer, Sergeant, really, Benita Blue, B-L-U-E. I think I've said that on many occasions, Miss Blue, when we had you as a student at Tennessee State University. And of course, Mr. James Duke has been with us earlier, and I think you are chaplain. I think Mr. Duke with the Metropolitan Police Department. And let me welcome all three of you, Pastor Walker, to the show this morning. And let's start off, Pastor Walker, by having you to give us some statements in reference to your background, your education, and some of your experiences. Ms. Blue will do the same in reference to her activities, and of course Mr. Duke will do the same. And by that time, we should have used the first 6 minutes, and then we'll take a commercial break, and we'll get back into the second segment of the show this morning, and then we'll be able to move forward.
All right, okay. Dr. Haney, as usual, let me first of all thank you for the opportunity to come on the show and talk about some issues that's very pertinent to us. And this is, to me, you always see it from one side or the other, but you have the Metro Police officers on the set, and also myself as not the voice of the community, but to speak to some of the concerns of the community. I think it's a unique situation here. My name is Pastor Kevin L. Walker. I was born right here in Nashville, Tennessee. Attended the public schools in Nashville, Tennessee up until the time, of course, I'm not ashamed to say that I got kicked out of all the public schools in Nashville. I wasn't a guy of great character during that time in my life, and from there I ended up getting in some trouble. I actually shot a guy when I was age 15, ended up at age 17, going into the military as a way to escape being incarcerated. Judge Richard Jenkins saw that as the best route for me. I had been experiencing with drugs and alcohol for many, many, many years of my life, and when I got out of the Navy, didn't make it in there long. Got out of the Navy and I went through OIC, Opportunities Industrial Relations Center. from there, I got a GED. From there, I went on to Tennessee State University, spent a little time with there. But all during that period of time, I was strung out on drugs, and especially heroin during that period of time. I got strung out while I was in the Navy on heroin. But after I got out, I got kicked out, not kicked out of Tennessee State. I had to drop out of there because I couldn't stay focused, and ended up incarcerated after doing many crimes, incarcerated in state prison system. Did a total of actually 4 or 5 years of my life incarcerated in state prison system, in and out of jails and the like, and workhouses and stuff like that. But that's who I am, and that's where I am today. Had some great parents that raised me up the right way, but I chose to go the other way. But I'm here and thankful to be able to sit beside 2 Metropolitan Police officers and not run.
Very good. And I must say you're making a tremendous contribution, Pastor Walker, you see, and we're glad to have you here with us this morning. Ms. Blue, what about you?
First of all,
Sergeant Blue.
I like to say I'm honored to be in the studio with my former professor that had me getting up early in the morning working on papers, and I want to say thank you. That taught me some discipline, getting up early in the morning. My name is Sergeant Benita Blue. I'm a police sergeant over the East Precinct School Resource Division. I cover, as of right now, 9 elementary and high schools in that division. I've been on the police department for 11 years. I graduated from Tennessee State, undergrad in accounting, a master's in business. I fell into this profession. I had my best friend, her husband got killed in the line of duty in Memphis. And when I saw the officers come out to support her, and at that time their daughter was only just under 1 year old, and the city of Memphis and the officers around the country came out and supported her so greatly that it touched me. And also I knew of a young man who was afraid of the police, and I decided to become a police officer in order to show youth that you don't have to be afraid of us. You can get to know us one-on-one. So I've been blessed enough that I was an SRO in the middle school level at Bass and McKissick. End up going into patrol. Then later I'm now a sergeant over the school resource division. So I'm back with my youth again and working with them on a daily basis.
And I think that's essentially what we want to hear, the information. And what we'll do, James Duke,
Yes,
is to, Chaplain, give you
Yes,
an
sir.
opportunity when we come back after this first segment. We've got
Okay.
about 30 seconds,
Okay,
so
that's
I didn't
fine.
want to
That's
get
fine.
into you
Yes, sir.
before we come back. But
Okay.
when we come back, we'll start with you.
Okay.
We'll have you to give us some information in
Okay.
reference to your situation.
Yes, sir. Yes,
and
sir.
then we'll be able to go into our second segment.
Okay.
And I have Blue
Oh,
and
right.
Walker
Okay.
to give us some additional information, and we'll
Okay.
depend upon Pastor Walker to sort of lay out some of the issues, because I
Okay.
think he's issue-oriented,
Right.
and I think that all of you are familiar with the kind of issues that we should talk about. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Pastor Walker, Officer Blue, and Chaplain Duke. And before we had our first commercial break, Chaplain, we promised that we would give you an opportunity to talk about your background and some additional information. So take as much time as you wish, and when you finish, then Ms. Blue will give us some additional information, perhaps based upon some of the things that you might say, and we'll allow Pastor Walker to help close us out this 8-minute segment by laying out some issues for us to talk about. Let's start with that.
Okay. First of all, Dr. Haney, it's good to be back on the show with you again. And I'm Officer James Duke, chaplain for the police department. I've been with the police department in a few months. It'll be 28 years that I've served with the police department. And for 18 years, I've been serving as the police chaplain. And so being the police chaplain, of course, I'm the bearer of the bad news when there's deaths. And with what's going on in the world that we see all over the world, one of the hurting things is when I see our young people has been murdered and having to go knock on the door, tell a mother, father that the child will not be returning. But other than that, there are some rewards in doing that because I get a chance to meet a lot of people and offer resources to people that may didn't know resources was out there for them within the community. And so I enjoyed, doing what I'm doing in that aspect of ministry. And I'm also a pastor. Be pastoring this November, be 20 years of the St. Paul PB Church here in Nashville, Tennessee.
You know, I often think about you when I listen to the news in the morning and hear some of the tragic things that are going on, and I think about what you said in reference to your responsibilities, chaplain, and I think about you often. Ms. Blue, what about you in terms of, do you find what you're doing to be challenging, and what could people do in order to assist you, excuse me, in doing what you do?
For my job, as my children like to say in the school system, they want you to keep it on 100. They want you to be real with them. And I feel that if we can break down the barriers, even though you might be restrained about your title, or if you can just be yourself, and let your community and your children see you as being a human being and relate to someone one-on-one, of course the officer is going to have to do their job. But it does not mean you have to not be personable. And for me, if I'm personable with my kids, and I call them my kids because even though I did not give birth, I'm still responsible for them 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And for me, if I'm personable with them, even if I just say, hello, how you doing? Do you need anything? To me, I'm able to get a little bit more one-on-one. They feel comfortable with me. So they see me just more than a police sergeant or a police officer. They see me as a human being. And for that is for me the greatest gift that we as officers can do is have a more personable one-on-one contact with our youth and with our community.
I would, excuse me, Pastor, I would imagine that this is one of the real issues that we have throughout the nation this morning, Pastor.
I would say when she was talking about, being personable, communication, especially in the African American community, I think there's a general feel that police departments, police all over the nation that don't communicate on a level that brings about a certain amount, a level of trust between the community and the police department. I think there needs to be better communication between the two, to make, and I have now I got to say that there was a time in my life that I had no regard, no respect for the police because I was a criminal. And of course, you try to stay away from the police as much as you could. And, but at the same time, I have a regard and I have a respect for the police and what they do because I understand today that they have a dangerous job, and I know that also there are bad police officers and that there are good police officers. And I think what the community is upset about in a lot of situations is that not so much that they're the bad that continue to do bad and they're not really punished for the bad they do, but at the same time you have the good police officers who are not standing up and not challenging the bad officers. So it sends a message maybe even distorting the message, and probably is distorted, that all police are bad, just because the good ones are not standing up against the bad ones. So you take a guy that runs out here, grabs a rifle, and goes out challenging and shooting at police officers and stuff like that. He's probably got a mentality that says all of them are bad, which of course is an error, but that's that mindset, that's that thought process. And I think that as the community and the police, if we get better communication, better relationship, I think we'll become better in solving crimes and everything like that, because people be able to feel freely to talk with the police officers and not feel intimidated, but to know that, okay, you're my friend, I can communicate with you. And I met Pastor Duke through ministry, and I had a guy that wanted to turn himself in. He had been wanted for some crimes. He called me up and stuff. Ironically, it was the same guy that I helped get out of prison, helped get back in prison. But at the same time, I was able to call Chaplain Duke because I knew him, and we have a relationship, and was able to create that bond of trust between Chaplain Duke and the guy, that they were able to meet. Chaplain Duke met him, they conversed, they met him, and he was able to take him down there and turn himself in. And that's a great thing, because that communication was there, that trust was there. There was even of a sense of friendship there, in that situation. And some of the things I would like to hear from the officers is that how can we as a community put the officer at ease, because they got a job, man. I can imagine how hard it is walking up on the car you stop, and you got an individual in there, you don't know what's getting ready to go down, so your lives are in danger on a regular basis, and I know that, I'm not a police officer.
And so what we'll do, Mr. Blue, Officer Blue, we're going to take a break in about a minute or so, but let me raise a question that dealing with resources. I think you indicated that you resource officer and et cetera. But do you think that if we could provide greater resources in our communities, not only to the police department, but resources that will allow for the maintenance of community centers and other activities that could draw these young people in, do you think that we might be able to cut down on some of the crime and some of the violence that we experience in all of these communities?
Absolutely. In my opinion, you can be a doctor, a lawyer, a police officer, a preacher. You have to have a connection with your community. That is the foundation. We can all be trained in our profession, but if you don't have a real connection, there's a disconnect. And for me, you got to have a pride not only within yourself, but you got to have a pride within your country. Just like Nashville, for instance, you got to have a pride in Tennessee, you got to have a pride in Nashville, you got to have a pride in your community. Get to know your resources in your area. I'm a vice president of National Black Police Officers Association. I work closely with the Tennessee Bikers Education Association, Metro Social Services.
Okay, so what we'll do, we're going to take this final commercial break, and again, we're going to start with you, Chaplain, when we come back, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Pastor Walker, Officer Blue, and Chaplain Duke. And Chaplain Duke, let us start with you by having you to talk about some of the issues that we face and that you face in the Metropolitan Police Department that might be mitigated if some of the people that you dealt with had a job or had some other kind of constructed from that perspective.
Okay, first of all, perception can make or break anything. And a lot of times when it comes to law enforcement, the perception is more negative than positive. And so building relationships is very, very important between the police department and the community. And earlier we was talking about some resources and everything. What can we do to help? And I think it's important to involve the churches in this, because it takes us all to make it to work, all the citizens to be vigilant and to help out. But one of the things I was thinking, even in the churches, where during this time of the year, a lot of the churches, they have Vacation Bible School, where they have a lot of young people come in. And I think it would be good if they would invite an officer to come in as part of that curriculum, so they could talk to the young people, so they can get a feel and an idea how the police operate and everything. And I think it would be a big help, because number one, the children will be at a safe place, that they'll feel safe at the church, and and I would rather go talk to a child or young people at the church versus at the juvenile justice center.
Be less threatening at the church as far as these young people are concerned.
Yes,
they
sir.
probably listen more to what you have to say than if they are locked up, and then you go to talk.
It's a whole different atmosphere and a lot of more negativity that'll fall in
what
that
about you,
environment.
Officer Blue? Do you find that that some of the young people simply don't understand your responsibilities or their responsibilities, or what's the case with?
I think a lot of times we base on what your job supposed to be about hearsay and also about social media.
Yeah.
So we need to get to know each other.
That's right.
And what some people do not realize, we have two great programs in the Metro Police Department. That's our Youth Services Division. They have a program that works with the whole entire family, and also with the great program that's ran mostly by school resource officers. There is a family component that we work with the whole entire family for 6 weeks. And there's also the component that we work with the youth in the 5th and 6th grade. So there are resources for the whole entire family in order to bring a better foundation, because without family and without communication, we will be lost on both sides.
That's true.
Pastor, in terms of trying to meet some of these needs, what would you suggest as what we ought to do?
Well, you know, I just heard something that I wasn't aware of, and that was the programs through the Metropolitan Police Department.
I'd never heard of that either.
I was not aware of that, and I'm not sure how many other people out here that maybe not aware of that. And then at the same time, you know, how many people will be willing to embrace that, knowing that, you know, if this is an avenue, if this is an outlet, you know, for growth and advancement and, you know, development of knowledge, then it's something that we should access, you know, as a people. And like I said, I didn't know that it existed. And, you know, I'm definitely going to be inquiring about it, checking into it, and finding out more about it, and trying to steer and direct some people in, find out what the criteria and the like is all about it, you know. One of the things that really concerns me, Dr. Haney, is how we interact, how the community interacts with the police department. You know, I think that a lot of situations could be diffused, and a lot of times, a lot of these violent situations that may occur between police and individuals could be diffused if when stopped, we conduct ourselves in a proper way, you know, in terms of not being aggressive, not being, you know, attitudinal toward the police, you know, why you stop me, you know, I wouldn't, you know what I'm saying? You know, apparently if you got stopped by the police, that was some reason, you know, it may be a legitimate reason, might be a bogus reason. The fact is, there's a reason you're stopped.
And,
you know what I'm saying?
And since he stopped you, you are in a real sense in control of everything, because your reaction to being stopped will determine his reaction.
In a sense,
his or her reaction in terms
of
dealing with you.
Absolutely, because I think if I had encounter with the police, man, many times over my years as a criminal, and I never got beat up by the police. I never got slammed up against the car, none of that stuff. Because when they got me, they got me. I'm not getting ready to get smart with you and none of that stuff. You know what I'm saying? I'm not getting ready to provoke you to do nothing to me. You know what I'm saying? Just take me on to jail. I do what I got to do. But some people, and people fit a certain. It may not be actually profiling people, but at the same time, people fit a profile of who's dangerous or who you got to watch. Some people are just red flags, and when they pull them over, man, some people, man, you sitting up there with your hair all in dreads, man, your mouth all tinned out with that cheap gold and stuff like that. You got on some dark sunglasses. Well, you look like you might do something, not only to the police officer, but to me too. And a lot of other citizens around here. So, you can't say, and I tell my grandchildren, you can't dress like a thug if you're not a thug. You can't look like you're a crook if you're not a crook. You know what I'm saying? You got to look the part. And I would just like to hear from you all. What can a person do? When they encounter a police officer in a police traffic stop to keep the situation on a mellow terms.
One of the things is to let the owners know to remain calm, no erratic movements, because that's one of the things the police are going to be watching for, erratic movement and behavior and things of that nature. And most of all, keep the hands at least where they could be seen at all times, because the hands is what can hurt and what can kill, or whatever the case may be in that sense. And so and I would say wait until the police approach and tell you why they stop you and ask for whatever credentials they want and everything, and wait on them. Don't initiate asking, what did I do? Why did you stop me? Like he was saying, let the police
and say it with such an attitude as if you might be able to push the door open
there you go.
and get out of there and do something.
There you go.
I can understand.
There you go.
That's one of the issues. Officer Blue, you're dealing with children in schools and et cetera, et cetera. Now, what would you say to bringing about some kind of support from these young, how do you get their support in terms of what you do? Now, you're over a group of folks, and how do your people react to, the people that you are supervising, react to the children, and what would you suggest that they do if they're not doing it already?
The key thing I see a lot of my officers doing, and a lot of officers in the county doing, they have open communication. They have an open door policy. A lot of times you can be having a situation, you don't have to give us personal names. You can say, I know of someone, if you don't want to use your own information, and we can get you the resources. And a lot of times, if my officers do not have the resources, they do not mind calling me. I have a young person that needs clothes, or they need school supplies, or they're experiencing some type of abuse. Now, in some situations, we have to make a police report because that's our job. But we're there as a support system for not only for the school staff, but we're also a support system for the young people. So my best thing for officers and people in general, have an open communication and do not put up the walls, well, because this person is raised on South 6, or because this person is raised in North Nashville, you automatically assume. And we already know what assuming means, but you don't assume. You give that person a clean slate, how you want to be treated in life, and somebody give you a clean slate, and don't take the things that happened last year, last month. Give that person an equal opportunity. And once you break down those walls, they don't mind coming to you.
And so I think over the last minute and a half that we have here, all of us can agree that there can be some kind of cooperation between the police department and citizens and et cetera, that will sort of diminish some of the violence that we find, and the best way to do that is to be able to start each of us saying to ourselves what we have to do, you see, and then what we do determine what they will do once we're stopped. In other words, if we don't do anything, they have absolutely no reason to do anything, and so But anyway, I just wanted to see if we could sort of get this group together and have some kind of statements made in reference to what the police department is doing, in reference to what the community is doing, and what we all might be able to do in order to diminish the kind of conflicts that we find in our communities, not only in our communities, but all across the nation this morning. And so let me thank the three of you for coming by and giving us that excellent
Thank you.
information. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is policing and declining status of race in America. And of course, we have with us to talk about policing and the decline in status of race in America, Dr. Lewis Baldwin. And Dr. Baldwin, I think we can say that certainly you're no stranger to this show, and we've had you on many occasions. Yeah. And I think the topic that we're going to talk about this morning having to do with policing and the impact upon how people are policed, the impact that it has upon race relations in America. And so let's have you to start us off by taking the first few minutes to say something about Lewis Baldwin.
Okay.
Give us some information about your background, your education, and some of your experiences, and then we'll go into that second segment dealing with the status of Africans during certain periods.
Yes. I grew up in Wilcox County, Alabama, which is known as the Alabama Black Belt, in the late 1940s, the 50s, and the 60s. And I was very much exposed at that time to law enforcement, black community relations. I attended the segregated public schools in Wilcox County, Alabama, Camden, Alabama. I was educated at Talladega College in Talladega, Alabama, and also at Crozer Theological Seminary in Rochester, New York. And I received a PhD in American Christianity at Northwestern University in 1980, and of course since that time I've been teaching. I've taught at Worcester College in Ohio, Colgate University in New York, Colgate Rochester Divinity School in Rochester, New York, and also Vanderbilt University. Also taught courses at Fisk University and American Baptist College. During much of my career, I've studied the life of Dr. King, have produced scholarship on the life of Dr. King and his involvement with the civil rights movement. And I'm very interested as an educator in translating what I do in the classroom into what goes on in everyday life in communities. I retired after 30 years in the Department of Religious Studies at Vanderbilt University in 2013. So 3 years ago I retired, but I continue to write about Dr. King and to talk about the role of religion in transforming the American society.
You know, Dr. Baldwin, you've got, excuse me, so much information, and you've written so much about the African American experience and et cetera, that the topic that we have to talk about this morning really takes you way back into the experience of Americans, of the United States of America. That is policing and the African American and et cetera. Let's look at it from that perspective and have you talk about as you see policing during certain periods.
Exactly. I've always said that we need to see this in a larger historical context. We have to understand that the problems that exist between the black communities and law enforcement didn't start with the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, 2 years ago. It actually started with the coming of blacks to America. If you study, and I've done so in my research, looked at newspaper accounts in the 18th and 19th century, you will notice that there were always problems between black communities and constables and sheriffs and other representatives of law enforcement. So those problems go back to 1619 when we first came to this country, and they extend through the 18th and 19th centuries. When you look at the early 20th centuries, many of the riots that were going on in Illinois and other parts of the North and in parts of the South, Atlanta in 1906, you will notice that there were always problems between the black community and law enforcement. There was always the sense that representatives of law enforcement were combining or joining or uniting with elements of the Ku Klux Klan or the White Citizens Council. That was understood in the early part of the 20th century. If you look at the 1950s and 60s, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X talked a lot about how KKK elements and other white supremacist groups were collaborating with police departments in the subjugation, subordination of blacks. So we're talking about a historical issue.
And so what we'll do, Dr. Baldwin, we're going to take this first commercial break, and then we'll get back, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome to the second segment of the show this morning. We're talking to Dr. Lewis Baldwin, and the topic is policing and the declining status of race in America. Now, Dr. Baldwin, before we had our first commercial break, you were talking about policing in the period during the war, before the Civil War. But let's pick up, and let's allow you at your own discretion to pick up where you think is necessary so that we might be able to demonstrate the kind of things that happen between the police and the African over the periods of time that brings us up until now.
My point in the first segment of the show was to indicate that we have to look at this in a larger historical context, and to see that what's going on today in terms of police, African American community relations, didn't start with the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. There's a long history of tension, of antagonistic relations, of strained relations between the black community and the police. What we see today, of course, is a building on that kind of legacy. It's a product of that legacy. When Michael Brown was killed in Missouri in 2014, many in our society, particularly in the black community, felt that it was a continuation of what had happened in 1955 with the killing of Emmett Till. And of course we saw Tamir Rice in Cleveland killed, Freddie Gray in Baltimore. So what we see today is a tragic part of that legacy of strain and tense relations between law enforcement and the black community. Interestingly enough, it has to do with, I think, a lot of things. First of all, I think, is that in this culture, in this history of this society, there's long been this view that blacks are somehow or another genetically predisposed to criminology. And that was certainly the view in the 18th and 19th centuries. And unfortunately, we're dealing with remnants of that in the 20th. We dealt with remnants of it in the 20th century and in the 21st century. So we are still dealing with strained relations, antagonistic relations between the black community and law enforcement. And the challenge, of course, has to do with how we overcome this long history, how we overcome this legacy of antagonistic and strained and tense relations between the African American community and the police.
Now that's a real question, Dr. Baldwin, and I think all of us are aware of this tension and the antagonism, but now the question that you raised is how do we overcome such things, and let's see if you can answer that for us.
Yes.
I think that's crucial, because I think that in no matter what period we're dealing with, the ability to be able to overcome it ought to be the same.
Yes,
in many instances.
Yeah, Martin Luther King Jr. taught us that violence creates violence, or violence leads to violence. And what we are seeing today, of course, is not only violence against police. We saw that in Dallas a couple of weeks ago with the alleged shooter, Michael Xavier Johnson. We saw that in Baton Rouge with the alleged shooter, Gavin Long. And we've also seen police misconduct and police violence against blacks. The killing of Philando Castile in Minneapolis, St. Paul, the killing of Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge. So what we are seeing today is this cycle of violence, not only on the side of the police, but also the African American community. So what we have to do is to try and come up with solutions that benefit both sides. And we have people on both sides of the spectrum today. There are those who say that the police are victims, and there are those who say that the African American community is victimized by this kind. But I think on both sides you find people who are victimized. So we have to come up with a voice of reason, a voice of objectivity that gives us solutions for both sides of the equation. And so far we have not come up with that.
And some people actually want to turn the clock back to earlier periods in terms of how Africans were treated and et cetera. And I think one of the real issues too is that the more freedom in a real sense, you know, when we started out as slaves, you know, we had no freedom. And so anybody outside of the slave community had the responsibility of keeping Africans in their place. But as we move from one period to another, and then the 13th, 14th, and 15th, all of these amendments, but it really didn't change too many attitudes in reference to the overwhelming majority of attitudes that most whites had toward African Americans.
And we see that during the Civil Rights Movement with Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and other voices of the civil. They spoke out against police brutality. They spoke out against racial profiling, and they also called for more justice in the criminal justice system. So we're talking about a historic problem that we need to look at it in this larger historical context if we're going to address it. And I think that's very, very important. When many of us look at what's going on today with policing in the black community, we tend to look at it in a contemporary historical context or contemporary context. But we need to have more of a larger historical view of what's going on.
And have people understand that. As a matter of fact, I think that if we can create I guess we've created all the forums and all of the activities that we might need in terms of trying to bring about better race relations. But there has to be something that we can do, and there ought to be places for people of goodwill on both sides, African as well as the police department, to create that kind of goodwill.
Yes, and we need all institutions involved. We need religious institutions, churches, synagogues, mosques involved. We need fraternal orders of police involved. We need politicians involved, federal government involved, to create what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called a kind of coalition of conscience. And if we have that kind of coalition of conscience, people from all sides coming at this issue, then I'm sure that we can come up with some solutions to the problems that divide. And what we're talking about is a divide between law enforcement and African American communities.
And I think that when we look back over the history of that relationship, we can say in a real sense that we've come a long way. You know, because we don't have the hang-ins and et cetera that we used to have. But there's still a long way to go. But we have to understand that we've been able to overcome many of these things.
Because when I was a boy, when we saw policemen, we felt that they were the same as the Klan.
Okay, and so I think we're going to have a break, and then we're going to come back and continue this. We'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Sorry, Miss. Thank you, and welcome back to the final segment of the show today. We're talking to Dr. Lewis Baldwin, and the topic is police and the declining status of race in America. And so, Dr. Baldwin, over the last 10 minutes that we have here, let's give you an opportunity to sort of summarize, in a real sense, some of the things that can be done in such a way that we can leave with our audience this morning what they can find and pick out among these options, what they can do in order to help the whole situation.
Yes, I think we would agree that we are at a critical point in this nation's history. This is 2016, and we're still dealing with antagonistic and tense relations between the black community and law enforcement. What we need, first and foremost, are voices of reason and objectivity. We need voices like President Barack Obama. And President Barack Obama, of course, is walking a tightrope because he's trying to show, I think successfully, that he supports law enforcement, that he understands that without law enforcement, we live in a society characterized by anarchy and lawlessness. But he's also speaking to the issue of police misconduct and the killing of black men. So we need those kinds of voices. Unfortunately, we aren't getting many of those. On the right, the political right, we hear many who are critiquing Black Lives Matter, who are critiquing President Obama, and in many ways blaming them for the problems that we encounter in terms of the relations between law enforcement and black communities. But they are trying to come up with solutions. And I think we need to understand that we have to move in 4 directions. First of all, we have to emphasize the importance of education. And education is very, very important, as Dr. King taught us, and as a King scholar, I would recommend that, is that you change the mind, you enlighten the minds of people when it comes to education. Religion is important in terms of changing the hearts of people. Then you need legislation and court action, of course, the kind of laws that will respect the dignity and worth of all human personality, not simply policemen, but also African Americans and people of other ethnic and racial backgrounds, and finally, nonviolent direct action. Now, one of the groups that I see today that embodies all of these approaches to the problem, of course, is Black Lives Matter. They're very much concerned with nonviolent approaches to dealing with the issues of not only racial profiling, police brutality, but also inequality in the criminal justice system. And I think we got to deal with all of these issues if we're going to solve the problem. We've seen over the last couple of weeks not only the killing of Philando Castile out in St. Paul, the killing of Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge, but we've seen the killing of police officers in Dallas and Baton Rouge. And we need to understand that we aren't going to solve these problems that exist between the black community and law enforcement until we take this 4-fold approach. Education that changes the mind, a religion that changes the heart. And you recall when President Obama eulogized those 5 policemen in Dallas, he talked about the need for a new heart. Dr. King talked about that in 1968, that we need a new heart. Okay, so you not only change and enlighten the mind, you change the hearts of people. You also work through court action and legislation, laws to make sure that people's rights are respected. Not only people you don't want to set up a double standard of justice, one for police and one for citizens. It means that all people, the rights, the life, the liberty, the dignity and worth of personality of all people should be respected. And finally, nonviolent direct action. And I see Black Lives Matter as engaging in these kinds of approaches today in order to improve black community relations with law enforcement.
You know, one of the things that I think you'll notice, Dr. Baldwin, and you've probably heard people make some statements in reference to it, is that Black Lives Matter has been maligned
Yeah.
by many people.
Exactly.
And I think that we see that organization as trying to accomplish exactly what you laid out there, that they
Exactly.
are, in a real sense, instead of trying to create a problem,
They're
they're
trying
trying
to
to
solve
deal
a
with a
problem.
problem, solve a problem.
Exactly. We need to keep in mind that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was accused of creating problems. He was accused of initiating violence. But what he was concerned about was what? Eliminating violence and bringing about goodwill and cooperation between peoples of different racial, ethnic, and political, religious backgrounds. And if you look at the Black Lives Matter, it's not a black movement. It's a movement made up of blacks, of whites, of LGBT people, from the lesbian, gay, transgender communities, people of different religious backgrounds. They are coming together to fight for equal rights, for justice, not only for people in the police department, but for people in our local communities. And they understand that if you're going to resolve this problem, you need people who speak with the voices of reason and objectivity. And you don't see a lot of that on the extreme right. You don't see a lot of it on the extreme left.
And so, in a real sense, if we could all get behind some idea in terms of trying to bring about better relationships between the police departments and the African American community or minority communities, or the police department and other communities,
That's
because
right.
African Americans and others
Black
are not
and
the
brown.
only. All of us are affected by this, and if we think in terms of trying to bring about a better relationship and each person commits himself or herself to that idea, you think we might be able to accomplish something?
I think we will, and I would add that the upcoming presidential election in November 2016 will have a great impact on whether or not we're able to translate certain kinds of ideals and values into a system that is beneficial to both black communities or minority communities and the police or law enforcement. Because we need a society in which the rights, the dignity, and worth of all people,
All persons.
of
I
course,
agree with that.
are
That's
respected.
That's exactly it.
And I read recently where there is an effort in Tennessee to come up with a Blue Lives Matter law, which increases the penalty for the abuse and the killing of police. We need that for all Americans. We don't want to give the impression that we're setting up a double standard of justice in America, and too many of us give that impression. We need a standard of justice that benefits all citizens, that recognizes that people in law enforcement are like the rest of us. They're not above the law. They must conform very much to the values, the standards, the laws embodied in the Constitution, just like the rest of us.
And you know, Dr. Baldwin, I might be too optimistic in reference to this, but I think that as a historian, you've had an opportunity to see race relations from slavery up until now.
Yeah.
And we know that there were atrocities that were committed during these earlier periods
No
up until now,
question.
that there would be nothing like that today,
Yeah.
et cetera. And so we overcame lynching.
That's right.
We overcame burning.
That's right.
And we overcame all of these things. And in many instances, when we overcame them, the law was often involved with that. I think
That's
you
right.
mentioned Emmett
That's right.
Till. Well, the law was involved with
That's
that.
right. You
And
can't engage in those kinds of practices anymore, lynchings and burnings. And so we need to understand this whole issue in a larger historical context and come up with solutions that involve not only our religious institutions, but our orders of police around the country, fraternal orders of police, federal government. And I think we can solve this problem. Otherwise, as Dr. King pointed out, if we don't learn to live together as brothers and sisters,
Amen.
we will perish
That's
together
right.
as fools.
And I'm optimistic, Dr. Baldwin, that things will get better. We overcame
Yeah.
a lot up until this point, and so we're just moving forward in hopes of making things better.
Yeah.
And of course, let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning. give the two of you an opportunity to talk about the Muslim American policy. Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the Muslim Cultural Association, and we're fortunate to have with us two imams to talk about the Muslim Cultural Association. And our first guest is Imam Todd McKinney. And of course, Mr. McKinney will give us some information in reference to his background, education, and experiences, which will be followed by our second guest, Mr. Ali Akil. And Mr. Akil will give us the same kind of information in reference to himself. And so, gentlemen, what we're essentially trying to do during this first segment is to give you an opportunity to have 2 or 3 minutes to tell us about your background, your education, and your experiences. And then we'll have an opportunity to talk about the Muslim American Cultural Association. I think that is the formal name of
Yes,
it.
sir.
And I'll corrupt it. There's no doubt about that. But in the end, I think that we'll get it across. And so let's start off, Mr. McKinney, by having you to give us that information. And then you take about 2 minutes and 2.5 minutes. And then Mr. Ali will give us the same information in reference to his background, education, and how he got to us this morning.
I'm Todd McKinney, originally from East Tennessee, grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I'm what most people would consider a convert to Islam. I accepted Islam while I was away at college, around 20 years old, and beyond that, I'm a family person, a wife of I have a wife of 23 years, have 4 beautiful children, and an employee of the state of Tennessee as an accountant. And really, really happy to be here on the show and appreciate the opportunity.
And so the two of you, I think, established this Muslim American Cultural Association. Is that correct?
The two of us did. We were involved. Strictly speaking, it wasn't just the two of us alone. But you know, but we have a board of directors and an entire community who support the effort. Yes,
Very
sir.
good. What about you, Mr. Ali?
My name is Ali Akil. We both have similar backgrounds. Grew up in East Tennessee, Knoxville, Tennessee. We kind of grew up together. I would be what you call a second generation Muslim. So my father accepted Islam in the early 70s. So I kind of grew up with Islam as part of my religion and part of my traditions also. I work at Nissan North America. I'm a supervisor out there. So I have a family. I'm 14 years married. I have 5 kids myself. So we're both family men.
And so both of you, this is a relatively new organization that the two of you helped establish, and you've got a mosque in Nashville, or where's your mosque located?
Great question. You want to take that one?
Well, right now we're kind of in between places. We're actually, since we're new, our charter was formed in 2013,
Okay.
December 2013. So we're in the middle of acquiring us an establishment. Right now we hold our religious services at the Luby Center here in the downtown area. So that's where we're at. But we're looking to purchase and or lease a place. And right now we're in talks in a place in Donaldson right now.
As a matter of fact, I think that was one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to the two of you this morning, because the organization that you're establishing is a relatively new organization, and the idea, I think, was to make this organization known to other individuals who might be interested in becoming a part of the activity. And I think Dr. Al-Hadid was instrumental in terms of making us aware of this new organization. And so, Mr. McKinney, let's look at the establishment of this organization. Tell us something about how the organization came into being and the purpose that you find. I know the purpose behind it, but how did you come together and create a charter for such an organization?
We interestingly enough, Ali and I have known each other for a long time. We grew up in the same town. We kind of, after graduating high school, we both kind of took different paths. And then kind of found ourselves together again here in Middle Tennessee, in the Nashville area, and we've been working together on you know, in Islam and establishing community and family life ever since. A little bit of the history of the organization: it is affiliated with Imam Warith Muhammad, who. You know, who is a national leader. He passed away in 2008, but he was responsible for transitioning many African American Muslims to what we call Orthodox or Sunni Islam from about 1975. So the two of us, we have been active in that movement, you know, for years now, working together.
Okay, so we're going to take our first commercial break, and we'll be back, with our audience following this very short commercial break. Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Todd McKinney and Ali Akil in reference to the Muslim American Cultural Association. Did we get it right that time,
Yes, sir.
gentlemen?
Got it right.
And I think we got it right that time. But again, let's, Mr. Keel, allow you an opportunity. I think Mr. McKinney has already given us some information in reference to the organization, but let us give you an opportunity to add to anything that he has to say in reference to the organization.
Well, so we're building on a legacy that has already been established here in Nashville. So there's one other community here that also associates themselves with Imam Warthuddin Muhammad's leadership. So as a group, we decided, there are areas that in the city that do not have our representation. So we're looking to expand upon that. And what we mean by expanding upon that, we're looking to establish ourselves in 4 core areas in community development and human progress. And that is, the social life, building strong families, husbands, wives, children, daughters. Secondly, we're looking to provide education that is suitable for African Americans, that kind of help us and cater to our learning patterns and learning abilities. And thirdly is to establish some kind of economic system, economic development within our community, the African American community. And lastly is to establish ourselves with some policies that represent African Americans also. So we're looking to get into the fight. Also.
So this is a relatively new organization. And I think you indicated that you recently received a charter, and now you have a charter, and you're free to operate. Is that how it works?
Yes, sir. We have a charter. We've gone through the process of securing tax exempt designation, 501c3. And the point of all of that is for us to get involved. And I will say this about where we intend to go with the organization. We don't intend to be the type of group that petitions other people for the conditions and the changes that we want to see. We expect to be involved. Like Brother Akil said, we want strong families. That means we have to be good husbands, good fathers, good wives, good mothers. We want to be the educators. We want to be the businessmen, we want to be the civil servants that operate in this environment with some sense of moral obligation. And we really believe that the world needs that right now, moral consciousness and moral obligation. So we don't intend to just beseech others, and to take nothing away from any other movements. We expect to get busy about the business of life. That's what our organization is for.
Well, have you thought in terms of how you ought to respond to the kind of political situation that we find ourselves in? Is that something that would be of some concern to the two of you?
Oh, absolutely.
You want to speak to that, Mr. Keel?
It's ironic as you say that. So
no, I mean that's what I want. I think people would want to hear something.
So Muslims, I know, despite what you hear out there, there's a lot of rhetoric. And most of the time, the people that are giving you the rhetoric about al-Islam, they really don't have a clue. And so, with us Muslims, we take all life sacred, and we build our community upon that. And the most important thing to us is human life, but human development also. So when we see things happening in our community where lives are taken senselessly, it's alarming to us also. And the question is, okay, well, where do we go? Where do we fit in this fight also? So I think the most important thing that how we fit into this is moral responsibility. I think we have to establish a moral responsibility amongst us and put value on our own lives. That way other people will value our lives.
And so you think that Nashville is an excellent environment to establish a new mosque? Is that what you're saying? Because I think you said that both of you are from East Tennessee.
Yes, sir.
And so now you're down in Middle Tennessee, and you think that this is a good environment that to do what the two of you are trying to accomplish with your organization.
Yes, go ahead, brother.
Yes, absolutely. We believe that it is. Like we mentioned before, this is, what we're doing here is really just an extension or an expansion of what has already come before. Folks like yourself and others that we have been associated with who have been in the fight, who have been in the struggle for civil rights and for human rights, not just for African Americans, but for all human beings. We want to make this a better place to live for everyone. We wanted to make it a secure place to live for everyone. Other Muslim communities around here in the Nashville area, associated with Warith Deen Muhammad and otherwise, have been doing the work for a long time. And with regards to our position, our community as African American Muslims, we want to take our place. We want to step up and take our place. As leaders, we think Nashville is an excellent place to establish the work.
Very good. And looking over, as we said, the current political situations, do you find that that there's any kind of hostility or whatever toward your religion around? I mean, what's the attitude in reference?
Excellent question.
Because what we want to try to do is to get it out. And so folks can, I don't know, about whatever the situation might be, but that's essentially what we're trying to do here.
If you don't mind, I'll start with that question. The answer is yes and no. I have personally noticed, there's some hostility towards Islam, towards Muslims, towards the doctrine in general. I have not personally experienced very much of this type of hostility directed towards or aimed at African American Muslims. I have my own opinions as to why that is. Mainly, I think it has to do with, those people who fear Islam have already kind of struggled with African Americans for years and years and years. And I think there is at least enough of a familiarity
they know something about
that they know something about who we are and what we represent. Again, it's just an extension of the fight for human rights. Not anything new. So yes, it's there. I have not personally experienced that type of hostility towards our group.
But which is to say, Nashville is not too much different from what's going on around the world in terms of some of the attitudes in reference to people of your faith and your religion.
Correct.
Is that what we're saying?
Correct.
And I think what we're going to do, we're going to take this final commercial break, and then we'll have 10 minutes when we come back. And what I'd like for you to do over the last 10 minutes is to really do whatever you'd like to do in terms of getting the information out to your co-religionists or whatever, in terms of how they might, how we all might work together in order to improve things. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Mr. McKinney and Mr. Akil in reference to the Muslim American Cultural Association. And of course, Mr. McKinney, let's give the two of you an opportunity over the last 10 minutes to speak in terms of some of the things that you'd like for people to know about your religion, about whatever you'd like to know, so that we can try to build up a better relationship between people of your faith and other faiths in this community.
Yeah, so I think we were referencing before we left for the last break was the term Islamophobia, and have we experienced that? Personally, I haven't experienced that either. strictly because of the groundwork that was laid before us. Most people are, as you call, converts or reverts or as second generation Muslims. We came through the whole experience of the Nation of Islam and then into Orthodox El-Islam or Sunni El-Islam. And my father, he laid a lot of groundwork. So people really turn to us when they see us Muslim African Americans to come. They ask us personally. They ask us, "Hey, where are you guys at? We need you back in our communities. We need you in our communities, policing our communities and helping our communities." So we've laid this kind of track work or groundwork for what we see today.